Hello students, I welcome you all to Obstetrics and Gynecology with Mackler. So in this module, we are going to discuss about the supports of uterus. So supports of uterus is a very important theoretical question which has been asked very frequently in all the university examinations, right? At least one single question will be from this supports of uterus. So I have given a separate module for the supports of uterus. So while discussing about the supports of uterus, we have three important sources. So one is the mechanical support which has been provided to the uterus. The second is the ligamental support, and the third one is the muscular support which is provided to the uterus. So the major function of all these supports of uterus is to provide stability and support to the uterus to be in its normal anatomical position. Is that clear? All these three important support is to maintain stability and support to the uterus in its normal anatomical position. So when discussing about the mechanical supports of uterus, what do you mean? So mechanically, some structures are actually holding this uterus in its normal anatomical position, and it is maintaining its stability and providing support to the uterus. So when we discuss mechanical support, we have two important angles to take into consideration. So one is the angle of anteversion, and the second one is the angle of anteflexion. Angle of anteversion and angle of anteflexion. So angle of anteversion is 90 degrees, right? Angle of anteversion is 90 degrees and the angle of anteflexion is 120 degrees. So first is anteversion, second one is anteflexion. Angle of anteversion 90 degrees, angle of anteflexion is 120 degree. So now you will get the doubt that what is this angle of anteversion and angle of anteflexion? So ideally, angle of anteversion is the angle which is made between the axis of vagina and the axis of the cervix. So let me show you in the diagrammatic representation here. As you can see here, this axis, so this particular axis is the axis of the vagina. So this particular axis is the axis of vagina, and this axis is the axis of the cervix. So this angle which you can see here, right? So this particular angle is the angle of anteversion. So this angle of anteversion is ideally the angle which is made between the axis of the vagina and the axis of the cervix. So this long line is the axis of the vagina and the short line is the axis of the cervix. So the angle which is being made between these two axes, this is the angle of anteversion. So the angle of anteversion here is 90 degrees. It is 90 degrees. Is that clear? Yes. Now, so what is angle of anteflexion? So angle of anteflexion is 120 degrees and it is the angle which has been made between the axis of the cervix and the axis of the uterus. So let me show you here. As you can see here, what is the angle of cervix here? So the angle of cervix, as you can see here, this is the angle of cervix. And the angle of uterus is the long line which is passing here, right? So the angle which is being made between the angle of axis of the cervix and the axis of the uterus, so this particular angle is the angle of anteflexion and it is 120 degrees. So here the uterus is anteverted and it is anteflexed. Is that clear? The uterus is anteverted and it is anteflexed. Anteverted, anteflexed. Is that clear? So this is the normal position of the uterus. So if anyone is going to ask you what is the normal position of uterus, so the uterus is anteverted and anteflexed. Angle of anteversion is 90 degrees. Angle of anteflexion is 120 degrees. So basically, we have three important structures to take into consideration. So what are those structures? Let me show you here. So those structures are the uterus, the cervix, and the vagina. Clear? Yes. So the angle which is being made between the axis of vagina and the axis of cervix, so this angle is called as angle of anteversion. At the same time, the angle which is being made between the axis of the uterus and the axis of cervix is called as angle of anteflexion. Angle of anteversion is 90 degrees. Angle of anteflexion is 120 degrees. So the normal position of uterus is the uterus is going to be anteverted and anteflexed. So this is the normal anatomical position of the uterus. So what is the mechanical support which has been provided to the uterus is this angle of anteversion and the angle of anteflexion. So now there definitely has to be some structure which is going to keep this uterus in an anteverted position. So what is that structure? It is a ligament, and that ligament is called as the round ligament. So this round ligament is the structure which is keeping the uterus in the anteverted position. See, we all know that the normal position of the uterus is anteverted and anteflexed. So what is that one structure which is going to hold the uterus in anteverted position? Is mainly the round ligament. So round ligament is the structure which is going to keep the uterus in anteverted position. Clear? Yes. So round ligament and even the uterosacral ligament is also providing some sort of support. Uterosacral ligament is also providing some sort of support to keep the uterus in anteverted position. So if anyone asks you the question, which is the ligament that keeps the uterus in anteverted position, it is mainly the round ligament which is going to keep the uterus in the anteverted position. Right? So basically angle of anteversion and angle of anteflexion has been discussed now, which is the mechanical support of the uterus. So now we have some important points here. So the normal position of uterus is anteverted and anteflex, which is 90 degrees and 120 degrees. Clear? Yes. The ligament that maintains the uterus in anteverted position, yes, we discussed that just now. That is the round ligament followed by the uterosacral ligament. So when we are going to discuss about the ligament, we'll be discussing about all these ligament. But now just remember that the ligament which is going to hold the uterus in anteverted position is round ligament and the uterosacral ligament. But mainly it is the round ligament. Okay. So if the options is going to be round ligament and uterosacral ligament, you have to pick only the round ligament. So round ligament is the basically primary structure which is going to maintain the uterus in anteverted position. So now I told you that the normal position of uterus is anteversion and anteflexion. But if the uterus is going to be in the opposite position, that is in retroversion, what is the ligament which is going to prevent the uterus from this retroversion position? See, it is very simple. I told you that the normal position of uterus is anteversion and anteflexion. Now, the contrary question here is that what is that structure which is preventing the uterus from the retroverted position? So there has to be some structure which is preventing the uterus from retroversion and maintaining the uterus in anteversion. So the maintaining part is done by the round ligament. But which is that one part which is preventing the uterus from retroversion? So that is the uterosacral ligament. So indirectly, uterosacral ligament is maintaining the uterus in the anteverted position. So therefore, I told you the ligament that maintains the uterus in anteverted position is round ligament followed by uterosacral ligament, because uterosacral ligament prevents the retroversion of the uterus. Is that clear? Yes. And now here, the most important point is many people will ask you in some one-liners, in which condition you will see fixed retroverted uterus. Always remember, fixed retroverted uterus is seen in endometriosis. Fixed retroverted uterus is seen in endometriosis. Is that clear? Yes. And here we discuss about the angle of anteversion and angle of anteflexion. Yes, right. Now, so moving to the ligamental supports of the uterus, we have two kinds of ligamental support. So one is the primary ligamental support and the second one is the secondary ligamental support. Always primary is more important. Primary importance is given to primary and the secondary support is the secondary important. Clear? Yes. So primary ligamental support is basically of three ligaments. These three ligaments are the very important ligaments which is supporting the uterus to be in its normal anatomical position, and it is providing support and stability. So what are those primary ligamental supports? The first one is the pubocervical ligament. The second one is the transverse cervical ligament, and the third one is the uterosacral ligament. I know it is a little bit difficult for you to remember these terms, so I am going to just show you the diagram of these ligaments so that you need not just memorize anything, you can just observe it and you will be remembering everything. So let me show you here. So as you can see here, this ligament which you see here, this ligament which you are seeing here is the pubocervical ligament. So why you call it as pubocervical ligament? So this part is the symphysis pubis. Pubis symphysis is that part, and this part is the cervix. So the ligament which is running between the pubic symphysis and the cervix is the pubocervical ligament. So symphysis pubis, from the pubis you take the term pubo. From the cervix you take the term cervical. So the ligament which is running between the symphysis pubis and the cervix is the pubocervical ligament. So first ligament is over. The second ligament is the ligament which is present transversely, right? The ligament which is present transversely around the cervix, that is called as the transverse cervical ligament. So this is the uterus and this part is the cervix. So on either sides of the cervix, transversely a ligament is present which is called as the transverse cervical ligament. So it is present on either sides of the cervix and it is transversely situated. So therefore it is called as transverse cervical ligament. And the third ligament is the ligament which is running between the uterus and the sacrum. So here you can see the sacrum which is situated posteriorly, and here this is the uterus. So the ligament which is running between the uterus and the sacrum is called as the uterosacral ligament. Is that clear? So basically we have three important ligaments: pubocervical, transverse cervical and uterosacral ligament. Pubocervical ligament is the ligament which is running between the symphysis pubis and the cervix. So it is called as pubocervical ligament. Transverse cervical ligament is the ligament which is running transversely on either sides of the cervix. So it is called as transverse cervical ligament. Uterosacral ligament is the ligament which is running between the sacrum of the pelvis and the uterus. So between the uterus and the sacrum of the pelvis, the ligament is called as uterosacral ligament. Is that clear? So as you can see here, the ligament which is situated between the symphysis pubis and the cervix is called as pubocervical ligament. Pubocervical ligament. And the ligament which is situated transversely on either sides of the cervix is called as the transverse cervical ligament. And the ligament which is situated between the sacrum of the pelvis and the uterus is called as the uterosacral ligament. So now it is clear for you? Yes, it is very simple as such. Okay, now out of these three ligaments, which is that one ligament which is very important? So out of these three ligaments, the most important ligament is the transverse cervical ligament, because it is the strongest ligament which is supporting the uterus. So out of this pubocervical, uterosacral and transverse cervical ligament, transverse cervical ligament is the strongest ligament which is providing support and stability to the uterus. So therefore, this transverse cervical ligament is called as the cardinal ligament. Cardinal means it's the most important ligament out of these three ligaments. So it is also called as the cardinal ligament, and it is also known as the Mackler's ligament. It is also known as the transverse cervical ligament, is also known as the cardinal ligament and Mackler's ligament, because it is strongest ligament out of these three ligaments which is supporting the uterus. Clear? Yes. So now, combining these three ligaments, we give a term. The pubocervical ligament, the cardinal or the transverse cervical ligament, and the uterosacral ligament is called as the triradiate ligament. Is called as the triradiate ligament. It is radiating in nature. As you can see here, let me show you here. See, as you can see here, it is radiating. From here, it is radiating, right? It is called as triradiate ligament. 1, 2, and 3. It is called as the triradiate ligament. Is that clear? It is called as the triradiate ligament. So pubocervical, cardinal ligament, uterosacral ligament, on the whole it is called as the triradiate ligament. So the primary ligamental support is by three important ligaments: pubocervical, transverse cervical and uterosacral. Out of these three, the strongest ligament is the transverse cervical ligament. Therefore it is also called as the cardinal ligament or the Mackler's ligament. Clear? Yes. So this is the primary ligamental support. Now what is the secondary ligamental support? The secondary ligamental support is the round ligament. The secondary ligamental support is the round ligament. Is that clear? Yes. And round ligament is the structure which is maintaining the uterus in the anteverted position, right? So the secondary support, ligamental support, is the round ligament. Yes, the round ligament prevents the round ligament will keeps the uterus. Round ligament keeps the uterus in the anteverted position. Keeps the uterus in anteverted position, and it will prevent. And the uterosacral ligament is going to prevent. Uterosacral sacral ligament is going to prevent the uterus from retroversion. So primary ligamental support is pubocervical, transversocervical, uterosacral, and the secondary ligamental support is by the round ligament. Is that clear? Yes. Which ligament does not support the uterus? So there is one ligament which does not support the uterus, and that ligament is called as the broad ligament. So broad ligament is not a ligament, right? It is a misnomer. It is actually a peritoneal fold. It is a peritoneal fold which is called as a ligament. It is called as the broad ligament. So broad ligament does not provide any support and stability to the uterus. Clear? Yes. So now we are moving on to the muscular supports of the uterus. We are discussing about the muscular supports of the uterus. Which is the most important muscular support of the uterus? The most important muscular support of the uterus is by the levator ani muscle. So levator ani muscle is a combination of two muscles, which is the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus. Pubococcygeus and iliococcygeus. Please remember, you will get many sort of confusions in this term. So levator ani muscle includes only two muscles, and it is the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus. Pubococcygeus and iliococcygeus make up the levator ani muscle, which is the most important muscular support of the uterus. Followed by, we have the superficial transverse perineal muscle, the deep transverse perineal muscle, the bulbospongiosus muscle, and the bulbococcygeus muscle. So the most important muscular support of the uterus is the levator ani muscle, which is the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus. Of these two, pubococcygeus is even more important than the iliococcygeus. Clear? Yes. Followed by superficial transverse perineal muscle, deep transverse perineal muscle, bulbospongiosus, and bulbococcygeal muscle. Is that clear? Yes. Now, what are these two muscles which do not support the uterus? So out of the pelvic floor muscles, which are those muscles which does not support the uterus? So those are ischio-coccygeus and the ischio-cavernosus. So these basic muscles do not support the uterus. They have nothing to support the uterus because they are actually situated in a triangular fashion and they are not inserted in the perineal body. So because of that reason, this ischio-coccygeus and ischio-cavernosus muscle do not support the uterus. Now, having discussed about the theoretical points, now let's see the schematical representation. Now, as you can see here, this is the levator ani muscle. So this muscle you can see here, right? This is the levator ani muscle. Clear? Yes. So this is the pubococcygeus, as you can see here, and this is the iliococcygeus. So pubococcygeus and iliococcygeus together make up the levator ani muscle. And here this structure which you can see here is the perineal body. So perineal body is ideally a fibromuscular structure which is situated in the midline of the perineum. So in the midline of the perineum, this perineal body is situated, which is basically a fibromuscular structure which is situated between the anus and the genitals. So between the anal opening and the genital, this perineal body is situated. So this perineal body is at high risk of injury during the childbirth. Clear? Right. So most of these muscles which is supporting the uterus will be inserted to the perineal body. What are those muscles which do not attach to the perineal body? Are those two muscles which do not support the uterus, which is the ischio-coccygeus and the ischio-cavernosus muscle. Both these muscles do not support the uterus and they are not attached to the perineal body, because this perineal body is situated in the midline. And since it is situated in the midline, all of the muscles which are supporting the uterus will get inserted to the perineal body. Clear? Yes. And this is the external anal sphincter surrounding the anus. This muscle is the external anal sphincter. This is the perineal body. This is the levator ani, pubococcygeus, and this is the iliococcygeus. And here you can see the bulbospongiosus muscle here, right? This is the bulbospongiosus muscle. And those muscles which are shown here is the ischio-cavernosus muscle. So these muscles, they are situated in a triangular fashion, right? And they are not inserted in the perineal body. So that because of that reason, they do not support the uterus. Clear? Yes. And these, as you can see here, these are the levator ani muscle. These are the transverse perineal muscle. We have the superficial transverse perineal and the deep transverse perineal. So basically the muscular supports of the uterus are of the levator ani muscle, which is comprising of the pubococcygeus and the iliococcygeus, followed by the superficial transverse perineal muscle, the deep transverse perineal muscle, and the bulbospongiosus and the bulbococcygeus muscle, which is those muscles which do not support the uterus are those muscles which are not attached to the perineal body. Those are the ischiocavernosus and the ischio-coccygeal muscle. Is that clear? Yes. So these are basically about the supports of uterus, where we discuss about the mechanical supports of the uterus, the ligamental supports of the uterus, and we have discussed about the muscular supports of the uterus. So in case if there is going to be a question in your university examination, these are the most important points which you are expected to write in the examination along with the diagram, right? Even in all the MCQ based examination, questions are asked about the supports of uterus, right? Yes. So in the subsequent module, we are going to discuss about the prolapse of the uterus. So because of that only, we have discussed about the supports of uterus now. So when we are going to discuss about the prolapse of uterus, we'll be discussing even further about all the supports of uterus, right? So until then, please keep studying, students. If you have any doubt, please write to us in the Mackler Gmail handle. We will reply to you as early as been possible. And please subscribe to this Mackler